This is the Double O Podcast. I'm Kelly Davis, founder of My Melton and part-time television star. And this podcast is dedicated to telling you guys all about Melton and a few stories about my experiences running the campaign and living, working and socialising within the small market town of Melton Mowbray, aka that place that the BBC said is the worst place to live if you're ages 16 to 26. If this pandemic has taught me anything, it's that the humble art of critical thinking has been ignored and neglected in our education system, which I find a grave shame as somebody going into that particular career path. I state this because the things I've seen on social media that people have shared have been anything from barbaric to insane to insulting. My favourite ones were the COVIDiots who hadn't quite worked out that one does in fact get a test for HIV. And the new one to the mix today was the army policing villages. Yes, you heard correctly. This morning on our town's local neighbourhood watch page, we had this situation where somebody had accused the local British Army that literally live opposite my house of going into Asfordby and policing the village. And this accusation was posted on Neighbourhood Watch because whenever this sort of thing gets posted, it's always on Neighbourhood Watch. For previous reference, we had somebody sharing a post about how you can tell if you've got COVID by holding your breath. Well, if you believe that, I've got a really good bridge to sell you and a couple of gullibles that are written upon your ceiling. But I digress. So, following this, I don't know how Melton Police were informed of this. I don't know if they followed the page or someone messaged them or whatever, but they ended up going to Asfordby only to find that nobody had told them or seen the Asfordby army policing the Asfordby villages. So the Mountain Police then had to tweet, and then Alicia, our MP, then had to confirm the tweet that the armed forces were in fact not policing Asfordby during these restrictions. So you had this incident in Melton because, of course, where the police had to check that the army weren't policing, and then the MP had to confirm that the police had seen the village to confirm that the army weren't policing in Asfordby. That's not an indication of what's to come, Melton, during this pandemic. I will not be sure. I thought we'd left the crazy lies behind, but clearly if Joe Wick and Clap for Carers, which is now changed to Clap for Heroes, is coming back, goes to show we are pretty much one Tiger King series away from Groundhog Day. This week's unpaid business spotlight is Melton Sports. Now, as we're in January, many of you will be looking to eat healthier and get fit during the pandemic, and you might have traditionally chose to do this via a gym membership. However, now we're in a national lockdown, gyms are unfortunately closed until mid-February. So alongside running, you're going to need some other ways to keep fit. And this is where Melton Sports come in. They have a variety of different equipment for all of your fitness needs, such as dumbbells, hydration products, and entertainment tables like pool tables alongside that. For you runners out there, they also have full running kit, including reflective gear and a head torch for those of you who are running in the evening due to being key workers by the daytime. They're offering a delivery service to those of you living in or near Melton throughout the whole of the national lockdown as well. So you don't even need to leave your house in order to pick up your products. So you can check them out on their Facebook and Instagram at Melton Sports to see what they've got on offer and make your order. In addition to this, they also have a loyalty card, which you have one stamp for every £10 you spend, with you getting £5 or £10 off respectively, depending on whether you cash in at 5 stamps or at 10 stamps. For those of you who plan to really bulk out your gym throughout this whole pandemic. So once again, that's Melton Sports on King Street, Melton Mowbray, and you can check them out on Facebook at Melton Sports and Instagram at Melton Sports as well. You know, as somebody who learns about British values as part of her day job in education, one of the things that I've always wondered is what makes somebody British, and what constitutes Britishness. And I've been thinking about this for a while and looking at different people's answers, and I think I finally worked it out. You can tell how British somebody is by how they describe their town. If somebody says their town is bad, they're probably British. If they think their town is great, they're either not British and or just moved into the town where everything is all sparkly, rosy, and essentially they're in the honeymoon period of their time in their particular region. Now, one place that cements this idea of Britishness and the rubbish towns theory is a website called I Live Here. Now, for those of you who have never encountered I Live Here, it is a website where residents from a particular area can submit miniature essays as to what is wrong with where they live. So Melton currently has 2 articles up there, one of which I will be doing a dramatic reading of in a minute. And then in addition to this, they have the top 10 worst places to live in the UK that changes every single year and is done by a poll. So this year, as a twist, they decided, as well as going into details for the top 10, they also decided to cover the whole of the top 50. So the only good news that we have in Melton at the moment, given the COVID scenario I discussed earlier, is the fact that we are no longer, at the very least for this year, in the top 50 places, the worst to live. For relativity, one of our train neighbours, Peterborough, it was number 1 of the worst place to live. Now, I've been to Peterborough before. My ex-boyfriend from uni, his family were over there. And I tend to visit places and not have such a distasteful hatred towards places. But Peterborough is one of those places that I have a complete and utter detestment to. Now, I don't know whether or not it was because of the certain, we're going to call them for this particular segment, archetypes. So there's going to be lots of mentions of archetypes. For those of you who may have watched an episode of Jeremy Kyle, the archetypes I came across pretty much look like your box standard guest on there. And some of the words these 2 particular female archetypes used about disabilities and people with disabilities were quite honestly disgusting and not ones that I can put upon an expletive-free podcast. And then that's without the whole aspect of when you leave Queensgate, the town just city. That's how much of a redundant thing it is. It's like, it's got a cathedral, but that's about as city as you go. So yeah, been to Peterborough, clearly see why it's the worst place to live in the UK for the third year in a row. Third year, that's like big achievement. You think the councillors would get their act together, but no, they're not. Other entries in the top 50 included Leicester, which is the 37th worst place to live, according to this particular poll. And in addition, Nottingham, let me just find Nottingham, was number 27. Although, to be fair to Nottingham, it did improve because last year it was in the top 10. Loughborough isn't on the top 50, neither is Melton. So I decided, with everything going on with COVID, I would humour you all into what somebody has written about our wonderful little town. This particular post that I'm about to read, I'm going to read an excerpt of it. The full post is available at ilivehere.co.uk/Melton Mowbray, and the post that you're after is Melton Mowbray. The Neanderthals loiter outside McDonald's with not one GCSE in car theft between them. So that's the title you want if you want to read the full post that I'm about to go and read. Please bear in mind that there are some swear words and expletives in the original article. I'm going to bleep them out because, once again, clean podcast. So, I'm going to cover a little bit on the nightclub and the nightlife as told by this particular blog post. The nightlife is typical of a market town. Several pubs attracting a plethora of weird and wonderful clientele, including a smattering of archetypes should you look in the right places, such as the King's Head, Lion, Black Swan. The archetypes can usually be identified by their cheap bling and dodgy executed haircuts. Occasionally, an archetype may be sporting a tattoo on the forearm in a foreign script which, been known to them, reads something like, "My mother is my sister," after they got their archetyping dyslexic mate to perform this procedure at home with a darning needle and a barrow. The archetype's drink of choice is normally whatever they can steal whilst walking around an establishment, or if they feel like splashing out, a bottle of warm VK Grotta. Once you've had enough of the delightful pubs, you can scoot along to the mighty tubes. The phrase, "Are you going down, tubes?" can be most likely heard whilst on a night out around Melton, and it refers to the most unique nightclub in the county, nay the world. Get in before 11 p.m, else you'll be charged a lady, £5, for sampling this delicacy of flat ID and smashing Nisi on the desk. And then there's a little bit more discussion of tubes, which is far more expletive to the podcast, but is definitely one to check out should you fancy a giggle. So, my big question to you listeners today is, Melton Mowbray, does it get the representation of a crap town as per the I Live Here articles? Or do you think that Melton's positives outweigh the crappiness of said town? Also, another question for you all. Do you think that we should have belonged in that top 50 worst places in the UK? If so, why? If not, why? You can let me know your thoughts via sending this podcast a message, and we will be posting some of the best replies in a segment in next week's podcast. Let's talk local businesses. One of the things I'm working on at the moment during the third lockdown is a property portfolio. The reasoning behind this being that Melton Town Centre, as many of you will have seen or heard about through the social mediums, has a lot of vacant shops. You know, certain shopping places like the Bell Centre are close to desolate, barring a couple of nail bars and a cafe. Oh, and a vape shop. Forgot the vape shop. And because there's so many vacant shops in Melton now, especially with the pandemic, there's a lot less incentive for people to visit Melton as opposed to online shopping or another city. I, for one, personally, as it stands, has to go elsewhere for clothing because the local boutiques and the shops in Melton now, after the Arcadia group closed, don't offer women's clothes above a size 14. As it stands, I'm a 20 to 22, during my weight loss with my running. So there's a bit of a stark difference in terms of clothing options. And that was without, all the shops being closed due to COVID and the after effects of that. So I would make the argument that it's just as important for us to look at our recovery as it is during the pandemic. And even within the pandemic, whether or not there was sufficient support on offer is debatable. When I did a poll on the My Melton Twitter earlier on this week, 71% of people believed that there wasn't enough support provided for local businesses during the pandemic, and the other 29% said they were unsure. Not a single one of my followers who voted said, yes, there has been enough support for businesses in the pandemic. So even that's a questionable effort as to whether there has been that sufficient support there. But the reality is that at some point, this pandemic and the lockdowns that come with it are going to be over. As it stands, that's going to be in the spring, although this is Boris's spring, so we could probably maybe look at the summer, given his previous timetables when it comes to things like Christmas. At the moment, I'm hoping for an April-May event, fingers crossed, but once I've worked out how to plan it. And as part of that, we need to start reaching out to the local area. For instance, a lot of universities now offer enterprise centres as a way to help with graduate employment. The methodology being that a student or a graduate could try out their business idea at the university in question or the college in question, and then move on to a bigger space when they see fit. As it stands, these lots aren't really being conveyed to the universities. And therefore, we've got all these vacant shops and these fantastic startups in the area, and we're not matching the two up. It is plain. And you've got the situation where the startups can't go to Melton if they're not aware what Melton has. And ultimately, we need those startups. And I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer when I say this, but if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that chains now, unless the supermarkets, aren't going to touch us with a 9-foot pole. Within the pandemic alone, we had the Arcadia Group closing. So in our case, that would have been Dorothy Perkins due to administration issues. Peacocks and Edinburgh Woolen Mill are hanging by a thread, if not completely closing, due to their group going into liquidation. And in the case of Clinton's and Pizza Express, and Hayes, Melton was one of the branches that closed, even though the business itself didn't go into liquidation, because the managers of the chains could not see Melton's revenue being enough to justify its presence in the town centre when you outweigh it with its expenses. So the reality is that not many chains are going to want to touch us with a 9-foot pole now, at least not until the next couple of years. And therefore, because of this, we have to start looking at having more startups coming into the area. One, this improves our shop offerings, which means there's more of an incentive to them to visit the town centre. Two, the startups tend to come with a lot, if you're looking at your university and college startups, that's a increase in young blood. And with young blood comes vibrancy. And within young blood, if you've got more young blood, coming into the town and the borough as a whole, then by proxy there is more of a demand for facilities for these young adults to be created and hosted in order to keep them within the town centre. So it's a case that not only does the town centre win by having the shops being filled and the council getting those lovely business rates, but the other services that work intertwine that will also be better off because of that increased vitality and youth in there. So that's one of the big projects that I'm working on at the moment as a way to try and reduce our shop vacancy rate. So if you know somebody who is looking to have a shop premises when this is all over, perhaps they've been checking and trialing their business idea during the pandemic, or is a student that's working on it alongside their studies, or a graduate that's trying the idea after they finish their degree, feel free to drop a message and I am more than happy to send over the portfolio once I have gotten round to completing it. And that concludes another episode of the Double M podcast. If you want to hear more about the My Melton campaign, you can follow the My Melton social medias. We are on Twitter on MyMelton6. We are on Facebook using the username @MyMeltonMowbray. We are on Instagram. The username you're looking for there is This Is My Melton. It's also on TikTok, where we are My Melton. And then also the My Melton YouTube channel, which is My Melton. And you can check out the My Melton website at www.mymelton.weebly.com. I'm Kelly Davis, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Double M podcast.